Two numbers ran across the same screen this week, and nobody in that livestream chat did the math out loud. One number was $15,000 a month, announced like a birthday present, delivered on camera to a woman standing in a house he can't fully pay for. The other number was an EBT card, referenced at a dinner table months back, then swatted it again this week like a mosquito she can't quite kill. Both numbers belong to the same woman. Both numbers are supposed to disqualify each other. Neither one is going anywhere. Real quick before we open the folder. If the timeline nonsense in rap sits well with your feed, tap in, ring the bell, and ride this one out. There's a piece in here that doesn't hit until we get past the Ray's clip. Here's the surface. Jonathan Michael Porter, who most of you know as Blueface, went live on Kick and Instagram this past week bragging about weekly platform earnings, then announced on stream that he was bumping Nevaeh Akira's monthly allowance from $12,000 to $15,000. Same window, a resurfaced dinner table clip has him mentioning her EBT card out loud, and the internet, being what it is, called California's Department of Social Services on her. She responded on livestream. She didn't deny it. She performed around it. That performance is the receipt. Before I open past one more piece of orbit worth naming. WAC 100, the manager who has publicly claimed a piece of Porter's management structure since the Cash Money West era, has been running interference on adjacent Blueface stories across Clubhouse and the No Jumper feed since the spring, and any read of this week's broadcast that leaves WAC out of the room is a read that's missing furniture. All Hip Hop documented the management overlap in a February piece that also names the Los Angeles jurisdiction the foreclosure filings sit in, the Van Nuys courthouse, docket references from the Los Angeles County Superior Court that show up again later in this folder. Same manager, same county, same house, same broadcast. That context wasn't wallpaper. That's a load-bearing wall. The date on the Ray's clip is early August. The Kick screen grab shows roughly $26,000 a week on Kick and about $14,000 a week on Twitch, which, before we go anywhere else, I want to sit with for 1 second, because the math the streamer himself is putting on his own screen is the first receipt of this whole story. He's the one who published it. Nobody had to leak it. He filmed it, he narrated it, he posted it to his own story. Kick creator earnings breakdown confirms the platform's 9-to-5 split for partnered streamers, which is why the number on his screen reads as high as it does relative to Twitch's 50/50ths or 70/30ths tiers. The Verge laid out that split when the platform launched in 2022, and it hasn't materially changed since. $40,000 a week, gross, across two platforms. Call it $160,000 a month before taxes, before the cut his manager takes, before whatever the platforms hold back. Even if you slash that in half for realism. Because streamer gross is not streamer net, and anybody who's ever streamed knows that, you're still looking at a man who publicly claims to be pulling stream revenue that would put a $15,000 a month allowance inside the petty cash column of his spreadsheet. And that's the seam. Because at that same dinner table, on a completely different night, the same man asked the same woman about her EBT card like it was a punchline. Let me pull up what we actually have on file, because this is the part where I want to be careful and slow. The dinner clip, recorded on a live stream months back, the exact date is disputed across fan re-uploads, but the earliest archived version Dailymotion Mirror puts it in the spring window before Nevaeh's current pregnancy was public. Blueface, mid-conversation, turns to her and says he doesn't even know his own EBT card, implying, by phrasing, that he knows hers exists and that there's some kind of shared awareness of it at the table. It's a throwaway line. He moves on. She laughs. The camera moves on. That was the whole moment. Laid over the dinner clip is a second receipt most re-upload scrubbed off the edges. XXL published a transcription of the full 6-minute segment on July 29th, and the sentence right before the EBT line is Porter narrating that he already paid the light bill for the month in a tone that reads, in context, like a rebuttal to a complaint she hadn't finished making. The EBT joke didn't arrive out of nowhere. It landed inside a domestic finance argument that was already in motion when he pointed the camera. Whoever pulled the clip cut the argument off at the punchline. The full segment shows him choosing to escalate from bill talk into benefit talk on his own stream, in his own kitchen, with the camera he owns. The Ray's clip, recorded this past week on live stream, timestamp visible in the bottom right of the Kick VOD, cross-referenced against his Instagram story from the same night. He shows her the earnings dashboard. He announces the bump, 12 to 15. She reacts. He continues counting. That was the whole moment. Hip Hop DX covered the announcement the following morning. Sitting right next to the Raise clip on his own feed is a second post the reaction accounts largely ignored, a mirror selfie photo dump captioned. And I'm going to quote it directly because the phrasing matters. Grown man money, grown woman rules. The fader archived the caption before it was edited 3 hours later to remove the second half. That edit is a receipt on its own. He wrote a sentence, published a sentence, then quietly clipped the sentence in half once the comments started reading the rules half as a subtweet at the state. The full sentence sat live for 183 minutes, per the Wayback Capture timestamp. Somebody in that house made a call. The response clip, filmed by Nevaeh herself on her own live stream after the calls to California's DSS started coming in. She addressed her viewers directly. She didn't confirm she was on EBT. She didn't deny she was on EBT. What she said, and this is important because the exact phrasing matters, she said, what if I don't even have it? What if I've been got it cut off? 2 conditionals. Neither of them a denial. Both of them the kind of sentence you construct when you're being very careful about which lane the sentence sits in. Genius News feed archived the transcript within 24 hours. Directly after the cut-off phrasing, per hot new hip-hop, she followed with a sentence that most of the highlight reels sliced away. Y'all don't know my paperwork. 4 words. The word paperwork doing all the lifting. She didn't say y'all don't know my life. She didn't say y'all don't know my situation. She said paperwork, which is a very specific noun to reach for when the actual conversation on the timeline is about whether her paperwork lines up with his broadcast. Somebody in the comments is already going to say she was speaking generically. I hear you. I'm not going to litigate that one here. I'm just going to leave the word paperwork sitting on the table where she put it. That's the paper. That's what we have. Nobody has a screenshot of the EBT card. Nobody has a caseworker on the record. Nobody has a fraud finding from the state. What we have is a boyfriend who mentioned it on camera, a girlfriend who declined to deny it on camera, and a monthly payment structure that, if it exists as described, creates a factual conflict with California's income eligibility ceiling for CalFresh, which as of the current fiscal cycle sits at roughly $2,400 gross monthly income for a single-person household and scales up modestly per dependent. California Department of Social Services CalFresh eligibility publishes the schedule. $12,000 a month is 5 times that ceiling. $15,000 is 6 times. Okay, hold up. Let me reread the Raise clip transcript one more time before I go further, because I want to be sure I'm not misreading the framing. Yeah, he announces the number as a raise. Not a gift. Not an allowance. A raise. That word matters because a raise implies employment, and employment implies a payroll relationship, and a payroll relationship implies a W-2 or 1099, and either one of those documents, if it exists, would sit inside the exact stack of paperwork a CalFresh renewal application asks about. Which brings us to the part that nobody on the reaction side is talking about yet. If Blueface is paying Nevaeh as an employee, co-host, on-camera talent, content partner, whatever job title he'd write on the tax form, then either A, he's issuing her tax documents, in which case her income is already documented and the EBT question resolves itself the moment the state pulls her file, or B, he's paying her under the table, in which case there's no paper on his side either, and the whole raise announcement was a performance of employment that doesn't legally exist. Both readings have consequences. Neither reading is flattering. Rolling Stone covered his prior tax and financial issues in 2023, and the pattern reads as consistent: public displays of income, private ambiguity about where the paper actually lives. Overlay one more mechanic underneath that. Pitchfork surfaced California Secretary of State records back in June showing that Porter's primary content and merch entity, MILF Music LLC, had a registered agent change in late May and a fresh statement of information filed on June 3rd. That filing lists him as sole managing member. Nevaeh's name does not appear on the entity paperwork, which means the raise he announced on stream is being paid, if it's being paid at all, from a company where she has no officer role, no membership interest, no listed payroll capacity. The word raise cannot survive contact with the corporate paperwork. Either the LLC is cutting her checks as a contractor with a 1099 that would surface her income the moment the state pulls it, or it isn't cutting her checks at all, and the on-camera raise was theater dressed up in payroll vocabulary. Both roads lead somewhere he probably didn't map before he pressed record. I want to overlay the timing now, because the timing is where this stops feeling like a random gaffe and starts feeling like a sequence. Foreclosure filings on Blueface Los Angeles area property have been reported since late last year. The Shade Room picked up the initial filing in November. The property has been in and out of default status since. This is a man who has been publicly documented as being behind on housing payments, and who this week chose, on his own live stream, on his own account, without prompting, to display $40,000 in weekly gross platform revenue and announce a $3,000 a month raise to his girlfriend. The sequence reads as somebody actively trying to reframe his own financial narrative in real time. Foreclosure headline last quarter. Wealth display streamed this quarter. Not coincidence, choreography. Sequence deepens once you line up the notices of default. Los Angeles County Assessor and Recorder records, the ones any journalist with a $15 copy fee can pull, put the most recent notice of default on the Chatsworth property at March of this year, with a rescission never recorded. The reinstatement window under California Civil Code Section 2924C closes roughly 5 business days before the trustee sale date. 2 weeks before the raise clip dropped, that reinstatement window was inside its final month. The public-facing wealth broadcast landed at the exact seam of that clock. That isn't a random broadcast day. That's the day you go on camera when you need the algorithm to remember you have money in the same news cycle a courthouse is remembering that you don't. Now, the deleted then archived layer. The Instagram story with the earnings screenshot was live for less than 24 hours before it was pulled. Wayback capture from August 4th preserves the frame. The kick VOD of the raise announcement is still up as of this writing. That asymmetry, pulling the numbers, keeping the raise, tells you which piece of the display he wanted to live long-term and which piece he decided, on second thought, was a liability. And this is where I have to hedge honestly. I don't know for a fact that Nevaeh Akira is currently enrolled in CalFresh. Nobody outside her and her caseworker knows that for a fact. Her on-camera phrasing, "What if I been got it cut off?" leaves the door open for a version of events where the enrollment was historical, ended before the $12,000 a month allowance began, and this whole week has been about a benefit she no longer receives. That's a defensible read. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But the reason I lean the other way is the phrasing of the follow-up on the same stream, where she pivoted to talking about people trying to railroad her, which is not the vocabulary of someone who has nothing to lose from the inquiry. Somebody who was already off the program answers that question in one sentence and moves on. She didn't move on. She circled. That's a pattern read, not a hard receipt, and I'm labeling it as such. Let me zoom in on one specific thing before we get to the wider frame, because there's a detail in the raise clip that I keep coming back to. When Blueface tells Nevaeh he's giving her a raise from 12 to 15, the number he chose isn't arbitrary. $15,000 a month is $180,000 a year. $180,000 a year is, coincidentally or not, the approximate salary band that a lot of mid-tier content industry roles occupy: associate producer, staff writer, mid-level talent manager. It's a number that reads, on paper, like a real job. If you were designing a "she's actually employed by me" narrative for a state investigator or an IRS auditor to eventually encounter, $15,000 a month is the number you'd pick. $12,000 a month reads like an allowance. 15 reads like a salary. The bump wasn't just generosity on stream. The bump was, whether he clocked it or not, a repositioning. That's one red. I want to be honest. It's also entirely possible he picked the number because it was 3,000 higher than 12 and sounded good on camera. The Occam's razor version is that he wasn't thinking about state benefit thresholds at all. Both readings live in the same room. Zoom in on the audio track under the raise clip for one beat, because there's a detail underneath the vocals that changes the temperature of the room. Around the 8-second mark of the announcement, per the Kick VOD's own timestamped waveform, the background loop dips. The beat he had playing behind him drops out for roughly 2.5 seconds while he says the number. That's a producer's move. Somebody in that room, whether him or the guy running his stream deck, ducked the audio underneath the dollar figure so the number would sit clean over silence. That's not casual streaming. That's the kind of choice you make when the moment on the timeline has been storyboarded. Streaming that happens spontaneously has music blowing over the punchline. Streaming that's been staged has the beat step back so the punchline lands dry. Second, magnifier. Freeze frame the earnings dashboard screen grab before it was pulled. Chart metric doesn't publish kick numbers, but the visible column labeled sub-gifts on his dashboard shows a spike concentrated in the 72 hours leading up to the broadcast, meaning the 26,000 a week kick figure he displayed on screen isn't the trailing 4-week average, it's a peak week screenshot. Which is fine. Streamers pick their best week to screenshot, that's not a secret. But if the number he broadcast is a peak week and not a run rate, then the petty cash framing I ran 3 paragraphs ago has to soften. His real steady-state platform income is probably lower than 40,000 a week. Might still be plenty. Might be closer to 20. The receipt he chose to show is the receipt he wanted the story to run on, not the receipt his accountant would run on. Somebody in the comments is already about to type, so you're saying he's broke? No. I'm saying the number he broadcast and the number his 1040 will show are almost certainly not the same number. And the gap between those two numbers is where every read in this whole story lives. Third, magnifier. This one behavioral. Pull up Porter's last 6 months of Instagram captions side by side. Complex actually ran a piece on this pattern in April, the specific rhetorical tick where he introduces a financial claim, a car purchase, a payment made, a bill covered, and pairs it in the same post or the same stream with a subtle diminishing of a woman in his orbit. Not always Nevaeh. Sometimes Krizun. Sometimes Jaden. The pairing is the tell. Money up, woman down. Money up, woman down. 6 months of it, catalogued. The EBT dinner clip fits that pattern exactly. The Raise clip fits it in reverse, money up, woman up, but only in a way that reframes her as a dependent on his ledger. Different vector, same equation. He isn't varying the play. He's just varying the angle he films it from. Fourth, magnifier, digital. Wayback capture data on Nevaeh's own Instagram bio shows that between June 14th and July 30th of this year, her bio was edited 4 separate times. The word wife appeared and disappeared twice. The word mother was added on July 22nd. The link in her bio was swapped from a Cash App handle to a Shopify storefront on July 26th. If you're mapping her public identity across the exact window this story is landing in, she's been rebranding on a rolling schedule, moving out of the girlfriend identity and into a merchant identity in real time. If she's an employee of his LLC on paper, she's simultaneously building an independent revenue stream that would count as separate household income the moment somebody itemizes it. That's not the profile of a woman who's about to be caught flat-footed by a benefits review. That's the profile of a woman whose paperwork is being repapered in the open on her own bio, one edit at a time. Whether the paperwork lands where it needs to land is a different question. But somebody over there is thinking about the paperwork. I already know what the loyalist camp is about to type in the comments about her being smart enough to see the play before he was. Drop the timestamp of the bio edit that changed your read of the whole story. Now let's talk about how this got framed by the outlets that touched it. Hip Hop DX played it straight, reported the raise, referenced the EBT resurfacing, didn't editorialize. That's the beat reporter frame. Facts first, implications left for the reader. The Shade Room leaned into the response clip, headlined around Nevaeh's spell comment and the railroading line, framed it as a personality story rather than a financial one. That frame buries the money question underneath the theater of the response. The comment sections, meanwhile, ran a different frame entirely, mostly the if she's on EBT while he's a millionaire, that's fraud position, which is the loudest counter-narrative and the one I want to Steelman for a second because it deserves the honest treatment. The Steelman version goes like this: California CalFresh is a household income program, not an individual income program, and if Nevaeh is legally cohabitating with Blueface, his income is supposed to count as household income for eligibility purposes. If that's the household structure and she's still receiving benefits, the paperwork on her side would have to be constructed in a specific way, either claiming she's not part of his household, or claiming his contributions to her are gifts rather than income, or claiming an income level that doesn't match the on-camera payment structure. Any of those claims, if false, is a problem under state benefits law. That's the strongest version of the case against her. And I respect the version. But here's why the paper doesn't fully land it yet. Because we don't have her application on file, we don't have her income declarations on file, we don't have the state's determination on file. What we have is a boyfriend joking about her card at dinner and a girlfriend refusing to deny it on stream. The public record isn't at fraud. The public record is at conflict of narratives. The distance between those two positions is not decorative. It's the entire ballgame. Let me sit with two more outlet framings before I move, because the outlet choices around this story are their own receipt. Vibe went longer than anybody else, a 2,400-word piece that walked through the foreclosure filings, the LLC structure, and the payroll ambiguity in the same order I just walked through it. The Vibe frame is the system's frame. It doesn't ask whether Nevaeh committed anything. It asks whether the household is structured to make committing anything unnecessary. That's the smartest frame in the mainstream stack right now, and it's also the one the algorithm is burying. Vibe's engagement numbers on the piece are, per their public engagement dashboard, under a fifth of what the Shade Room's version pulled in the same window. The version of this story that centers structure over spectacle is the version losing the traffic war. That's the frame war in one data point. Variety went in the opposite direction, a 900-word explainer that essentially treated the whole event as a case study in creator-partner labor classification, with Blueface and Nevaeh named in the headline, but the actual argument being about the industry, not the couple. The Variety frame is doing something specific. It's using the couple as a load-bearing example for a broader labor policy argument the outlet has been building for 18 months. That's a legitimate frame. But notice what it also accomplishes. It puts the story in front of a policy reader audience that reads about labor law in December and votes on labor law by March. Variety isn't covering the couple. Variety is using the couple, which is neither good nor bad. But it's important to name, because when an outlet's frame conveniently advances the outlet's editorial project, that's a receipt about the outlet, not just about the subject. The counterframe that isn't getting enough oxygen is the one where the real story isn't Nevaeh at all. It's Blueface's choice to put all of this on camera in the first place. Because here's what I keep coming back to. She didn't post the EBT reference. He did. She didn't announce the raise on stream. He did. She didn't display the kick earnings dashboard. He did. Every single receipt in this story that exists in the public record exists because Jonathan Porter chose to put it there. His girlfriend's alleged relationship with a state benefits program is now a national conversation because he narrated it into existence on his own account, on his own stream, on his own timeline. That's not her scandal. That's his broadcast. And this is where the auditor voice in the back of my head starts flagging things quietly, because you don't casually mention your pregnant girlfriend's EBT card on a live stream unless one of two things is true. Either you don't understand what you just said, or you do understand and you said it anyway because you calculated the entertainment value as higher than the exposure risk. Both of those are choices. Neither of them is neutral. And if you're keeping score on whose behavior in this story is the more documentable red flag, the person on the platform contract getting paid to be on camera is the one leaving the deeper paper trail every single week. There's a second Steelman I want to walk through before I move, because a real headline over at The Hollywood Reporter actually made the case for it in a July feature. The argument being that Nevaeh's on-camera silence around the EBT question isn't evasion. It's the legally correct posture for anyone whose benefit status is under any form of state review. The reasoning, an outright on-camera denial that later turns out to conflict with a prior application, creates a public statement that becomes discoverable in a state proceeding. An outright confirmation surrenders the Fifth Amendment adjacent protections against self-incrimination in a way that a hedged non-answer preserves. Her attorney, if she has one advising her, would tell her to say exactly what she said. That's the strongest version of the leave her alone position. It's a real argument, and it's not a stupid one. Here's where the paper leans the other way. If the hedged non-answer were purely an attorney-driven posture, we would expect it to be one sentence, delivered flat, and immediately followed by a topic change. What we got instead was the railroad pivot, the spell comment, the "you'll don't know my paperwork" line, and a return to the topic 3 separate times over the following 40 minutes of stream, per the hot new hip-hop transcript. That's not the shape of a legally coached non-denial. That's the shape of somebody who's still emotionally in the conversation the state might have with her, and who couldn't quite let it go. Which doesn't mean she did anything wrong. It just means that her lawyer told her to say that frame doesn't fully explain the length or the return pattern. I'm hedging that red, though. I've been wrong about read of behavior calls before, and if her legal team was in her ear during that stream, everything I just said flips. This one's going to divide the timeline, and I know it. Let me pull back for a second, because the wider frame here is bigger than one couple and one card. There's a version of this industry, and it's been true for at least a decade now, where the on-camera partner is functionally an employee and the paycheck is functionally content industry income, but the paperwork sits in a gray zone because everybody involved benefits from the ambiguity. The streamer benefits because he can call it a gift, an allowance, a favor, whatever keeps it off his own tax framing. The partner benefits because undocumented income doesn't count against benefits eligibility, doesn't count against custody proceedings, doesn't count against anything until somebody makes it count. And the platforms benefit because as long as the streamer is producing content, nobody at Kick or Twitch or Instagram is auditing the household downstream of the checks. That gray zone has been quietly holding up a lot of the creator economy's messier corners for years. The Blueface Nevaeh situation isn't unique. It's just louder, because he keeps narrating it. Most of the couples doing exactly this arrangement have the good sense to shut up on livestream. He doesn't. And that's why we're here, on this stream, on this afternoon, reading his own footage back to him. Variety has been tracking the labor classification gray zone in creator relationships since 2024, and the reporting has only gotten thicker. There's also a specifically Los Angeles version of this story that I want to name, because California has been unusually aggressive over the last 2 years about benefits fraud enforcement in high-income households. Los Angeles Times reported a spike in CalFresh audits tied to social media disclosures in 2025. The state's investigators have publicly said they monitor open-source financial displays, meaning a live stream showing $40,000 a week in gross platform revenue is not a private document. It's an evidentiary artifact, and the fact that Blueface earnings screenshot went up on Instagram at all, even for 24 hours, is the kind of open-source disclosure the state's fraud unit is on record as using. He may have shown a receipt that wasn't just embarrassing to his girlfriend. It may have been actively evidentiary. That's not a prediction. That's just where the paper sits. The verdict I don't hear anybody else saying, and this is the read the reaction ecosystem is going to fight me on, is that Nevaeh Akira is the sharpest financial mind in that household. Sit with that for 1 second, because I know how it lands. The consensus read of this story, across Hip Hop DX and the Shade Room and every reaction channel I've queued up this week, is that she's the caught one. The one with the exposure. The one whose paperwork is about to catch up with her. That's the mainstream frame, and it's the frame Hip Hop DX, the Shade Room, and, in a quieter register, even Vibe and the Hollywood Reporter are all reinforcing by the way they order their paragraphs. Card first, then boyfriend, then money, girl-centered, guy orbital. Flip it, card last, boyfriend first, money in the middle, guy-centered, girl orbital. Once the frame flips, what you see is a woman who has, over the last 8 weeks, quietly rebranded her Instagram bio away from partner language and toward merchant language, added an independent revenue stream through a Shopify storefront, declined to confirm or deny anything on stream about her benefit status, and let her boyfriend, on his own accord, on his own platforms, publish every single financial disclosure that could become an evidentiary problem downstream. She hasn't put a single receipt on the record. He's put all of them. If a state investigator opens a file on that household tomorrow, the file will be full of Jonathan Porter's own footage, and her file will contain a bio history and a Shopify link. That is not the paper trail of the caught one. That is the paper trail of the one who understood the environment. The opposition to that read has a fair jab, and I'll place it. She's still living inside his house, still visibly dependent on his allowance, still not the one signing the LLC filings. The independence she's building on the bio and storefront layer doesn't yet exist on the payroll and property layer, and until the two layers meet, the sharpest mind in the room frame is aspirational, not proven. Fair enough. I'll take that. Another jab, and this one lands drier. If she were really the sharpest one in the room, she would have been off livestream the second the DSS call started, and she wasn't. She addressed it. She circled. She let the phrasing get sloppy in ways a lawyered-up response would not. Sharp people don't cook a hedge that leaks the word paperwork on national timeline. That one I have to give you. A third jab, almost sympathetic. Maybe there's no sharp mind in that house at all. Maybe both of them are in over their heads on different clocks, and the story we're all watching isn't strategy versus strategy, it's two people improvising in the middle of a foreclosure window and a benefits window colliding, and the sharpest financial mind framing gives both of them more credit than the actual behavior earns. I'll hold space for that read. It's the least flattering to my own thesis, and it might be the truest one. The absurdist jab. And this one's mostly for the comments. Sharpest financial mind in that household is a low bar when the other candidate publicly announces payroll on stream and posts his revenue dashboard to an app the state has said in open reporting it monitors. The flaw here is subterranean. Being sharper than that is not a Nobel Prize. And the mainstream read staging deepened one more line. Hot new hip-hop framed the entire response cycle as Nevaeh under fire, and that headline choice, subject positioned as the target, verb positioned as passive, is the exact grammatical construction the girlfriend-centered frame requires to function. The story is not Nevaeh under fire. The story is Blueface disclosing. Change the subject of the sentence and the whole scandal moves houses. That's the read the press won't print because printing it costs them the clickable headline. I'm printing it here because we're not chasing the click, we're chasing the file. Here's what I think happens next. The most probable landing is that nothing legally significant happens to Nevaeh Akira in the next 30 days. The reason is procedural. State benefits investigations take months, not days, and even in a case where the public disclosures are loud, the actual determination process runs on paperwork timelines, not viral timelines. The people who called it in this week will get an automated acknowledgement and no follow-up. Nevaeh will keep streaming. Blueface will keep announcing numbers. The comment section will move on to the next thing by mid-August. By the time any actual state action lands, if it lands, the news cycle will have forgotten what triggered it. Extending that cascade. Watch how the secondary players move once the noise dies down. Whack 100 is about to have a clubhouse room within the next 2 weeks where he addresses the story without addressing it, which is his standard operating procedure on Blueface-adjacent noise. Once that happens, the framing on the street shifts from did she commit fraud to is Whack managing this cleanly. That's a subject change move, and it's the specific move the Porter camp has used to bury 3 separate stories in the last 18 months per the all hip-hop reporting. The failure prediction for the opposition inside this scenario is that the fraud framing burns out inside 10 days precisely because Whack has already telegraphed is going to change the subject, and the reaction ecosystem always follows him when he does. The wild card version is the one where Nevaeh's team quietly moves her off the program in the next 10 days, and a resurface clip 6 months from now shows her referring to the program in the past tense in a way that lines up too neatly with the current news cycle. Watch what happens when the next live stream drops and the EBT reference either gets denied outright, which would be new, because so far it hasn't been denied outright, or gets buried under a bigger story. The Blueface camp is unusually good at burying stories by generating bigger ones. Don't be surprised if the next headline out of that house has nothing to do with EBT and everything to do with something louder that nobody could have predicted. Don't be shocked when the burial story, when it lands, involves Christian rock in some capacity, not as the subject, but as the timing. That relationship has been the reliable pressure valve for every Porter-adjacent story since the Zeus era, and by the next full moon news cycle expect either a resurfaced clip, a co-parenting filing update, or a clubhouse audio that changes the subject entirely. Rolling Stone has the historical pattern documented. Once that hits, the CalFresh conversation ends inside 48 hours, and every reaction channel that spent this week screaming fraud pivots to whatever the new noise is without acknowledging the pivot. The failure prediction inside this scenario is for the outlets that leaned hardest into the Nevaeh as target framing. They'll be the ones who look the most awkward when the subject changes, because they stake their headline equity on a story that got vaporized by a bigger one on purpose. The residue version, the 5U one, is where this gets interesting. Because whether or not anything happens to Nevaeh, this week just added another data point to a running public ledger of Blueface financial decisions that will, at some point, be used against him in a court proceeding that we haven't seen yet. His foreclosure situation is still active. His prior legal exposure is still open. Every stream where he displays income he isn't fully declaring in other contexts becomes discoverable material the moment somebody with subpoena power decides it's relevant. He's not just narrating this year's drama. He's building next year's exhibit list. That's the part that outlasts the news cycle. By the next civil court cycle, expect at least one of these live streams to surface as an exhibit in a proceeding that isn't currently on anybody's radar. Once a trustee sale, a custody filing, or a creditor's motion enters the record, the discovery rules on open-source financial disclosures are permissive enough that kick VODs and archived Instagram stories become fair game. The Hollywood Reporter already flagged this dynamic in July. Creator live streams are being subpoenaed in California civil matters at roughly triple the rate they were in 2023. The failure prediction inside the residue scenario is that the Blueface camp will keep operating as if live stream disclosures are ephemeral entertainment right up until the moment one of them lands on a judge's desk, and by then the exhibit list will already be closed. By the time the dust settles on whatever this week turns into, the specific EBT question will probably be forgotten. What won't be forgotten is the pattern. The man who cannot stop putting his own paper on his own timeline, and the woman who cannot quite say the word no when asked directly if she's on the program. Neither of them is going to change. That's the arc that matters more than the one headline. Alright, y'all. I told you at the top there was a piece in here that wouldn't hit until after the Raise clip. That piece is the timing overlap between the foreclosure filings and the wealth display broadcast, and specifically the 24-hour deletion of the earnings screenshot versus the still live Raise announcement. Which piece he kept public and which piece he pulled tells you which one he thought could hurt him. Draw your own conclusion on that. Drop where you land on it in the comments. I'm reading them tonight. Tap the like if the receipt first read fits your feed, ring the bell so the next case doesn't slip past you, and stay locked. Next one's already in the folder.